again. This is week number 3. So after tonight, we're halfway through the series of 6 women of the Bible. I hope you have learned something. I hope you feel more knowledgeable about some women that their stories are really profound and meaningful and can make a difference in our lives. One was not so good. That was Lot's wife. And then last week we had Rahab, who was pretty amazing. And a most unlikely person to be in the prominent line of Jesus. So, and that continues tonight. Tonight we were going to study the book of Ruth, which is really the story of Ruth and her mother-in-law Naomi, and Boaz, the kinsman redeemer, and the Lord. It is, if not my very favorite book in the Bible, it is in my top 5. And I have a personal story about that I will share with you sometime. So here we are. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad the sun is out and the rain is gone. So if you like Hallmark movies, you are going to love the book of Ruth. It has it all. It has tragedy. It has a lot of sadness. It has a lot of joy. It has a little bit of suspense. It has a little bit of manipulation, all those things that Hallmark does so well. But it absolutely has a happy ending. And I think it's important for us to see the happy endings in the Bible when there are challenges. You know, life is hard, life is difficult. And it's important for us to see how God works in difficult situations and brings them to his desired outcome. So that's what we'll be doing. How many of you are very familiar with Ruth? Just a show of hands.
You know,
A little bit.
yeah.
A little bit. Okay, good. That's perfect. At the end, you'll be, I think, very, very knowledgeable. So just kind of the fundamentals. I always like to talk about context. I've given you a map today in your handouts. If you haven't gotten a handout, I'll bring one. Oh, you've got one. Everybody has one. Great. It's the same map we've seen over the last 2 weeks, but now we're focused in on these 4 particular characters and 2 particular cities or regional areas. Bethlehem is where we're going to start our story. We're going to end our story. And in the middle, in the early part of the book, not really the middle, but after Bethlehem, there's a very significant time in Moab. What do you remember? Look at this map. What do you remember about Moab and kind of this area by Moab? Do you recall having been here before in the last 2 weeks? Near Sodom and Gomorrah. So if you look at the tip of the Dead Sea, that is where Sodom and Gomorrah were. Because remember, the Lord utterly destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah so that all the inhabitants, all the cattle, all the livestock, all the buildings would be destroyed. And the Lord allowed Lot to survive and his 2 daughters, but that was it. So keep that in mind when we talk about Naomi and her family going to Moab. The book was written about 1000 BC, about 400 years after the Battle of Jericho. So about 400 years after the story we did last week with Joshua and Boaz, no, Samuel. Looks like Salmon, Samuel, and Rahab, yeah. The context, this book was written about the same time as Judges, towards the end of the book of Judges. And if you have ever done a study of the book of Judges, it was a pretty grim time for the Jewish people. War, constantly warring. There was no strong leadership. They asked for a leader. The Lord gave them judges, but they didn't listen to the judges anyway. There was a lot of confusion. They were unfaithful to the law of God. There was moral and political chaos. No strong leader or government. People repeatedly turned away from God, wondered why things weren't going well. So it was a really bad period of time in the nation of Israel. There's a verse out of Judges 17. I think I read it to you when we talked about Rahab. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's Judges 17:6. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. Do you think that's any application today? That is the world we're living in. And without a God, it is easy to fall this way and that way because everybody has their own opinion about what's right, what is truth. On top of that, as we enter this story today, there's a severe famine. So the people in Bethlehem are hungry. So that adds a little more to the drama of the story. There's numerous themes we're going to cover. We're going to talk about loyalty. We're going to talk about divine intervention. We're going to talk about how God leads us in difficult times. We're going to talk about the concept of the kinsman redeemer. We will talk about redemption and what do you do when you're facing a new normal? When life doesn't go the way you planned, it's fruit basket upset. How do you move forward with a new normal? We've all had them. We all will have them. How do you live through that? Our main characters are Ruth, Naomi, the Lord, who shows up a lot, subtly and overtly, and Boaz. The name Ruth comes from a contraction, ruith, which may either be the word for the act of seeing, sight, beautiful, friend, and it can be translated as a sight worth seeing or a friend worth having. You and I would be so privileged to have a friend like Ruth. If you don't have a friend like Ruth in your life, I urge you to find one. This woman was amazing, and we will see that by the end of the story. She was beautiful. That was one of her characteristics, but it was really who she was, her character as a human being that made her especially beautiful. Her undying friendship and loyalty to her mother-in-law, her pleasant attitude in the face of disaster. There was no self-pity or isn't it awful in Ruth. She just kept her face forward. And initially she was not a God believer. She was a Moabite. They detested the Jews. They were idol worshipers. They didn't believe in God. But she came around and she did become a believer, was redeemed, and her life was changed. She maintained her poise and serenity throughout this entire book. She was obedient in all circumstances. So here we go, chapter 1, verse 1. Does anybody need a Bible? You know my preference that you have a hard copy of a Bible in your hands because I think it's important. If you don't want one, that's fine. But you make me happy when you want one.
I just want some there. I didn't bring it today. I didn't. Mine's at home.
That's okay.
Next time I will. I usually carry it.
Well, Kristen has a whole bag full of lost and found Bibles. So
Yeah.
if you don't like your translation and you want to try another one, I'm sure she can take that. People on the phone, do you have your Bibles ready to go?
Okay.
We're going to go fast because I want to leave a fair amount of time at the end to kind of summarize, to make meaning of all this. Chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came about in the days when the judges governed. Remember I said this is in the time period of the judges. There was a famine in the land, and a certain man, no name yet, just a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah, went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and 2 sons. Okay, look at your map. There's Bethlehem. It's in the land of Judah. There's a famine. That's the setting. If you were filming this, that's the setting. Interesting, the word Bethlehem means house of bread. And what was going on in Bethlehem at the time? Famine. So he went to sojourn, he and his family, to the land of Moab with his wife and 2 sons. Sojourn means a short visit. If you went to the hill country last weekend, that was a sojourn. Or if you went to Colorado for a few weeks this past summer, that would have been a sojourn. You go, you stay a little while, but you come back. Remember that. Verse 2, and the name of the man was Elimelech. Now we know who he is. And the name of his wife, Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were, I had to look all these pronunciations up today, Mahlon, and Kilion. They were Ephrathis of Bethlehem and Judah. So that's a neighborhood in Judah, like West University would be in Bethlehem. The name Elimelech means my God is king. What does that tell you? If that's his name, what does that tell you about him? My God is king. Sorry?
I'm just throwing something out there.
That's
He's
right.
godly.
He's godly. You know, my God, his parents named him. They wanted him to be, he was raised in a Jewish home, in a godly home. And God was the king of that family, which means he was brought up that way. Naomi's name means pleasant and lovely. Remember that. Their sons' names are a little more interesting. Malon, his name means puny, and Kilion, his name means sickly. Now, what kind of parents would name their kids puny and sickly? I don't know. But if we haven't, in those days, they named people for either the attributes they had or maybe the attributes they wanted their children to have. That one baffles me. Anyway, because of the famine, the end of verse 2, they entered the land of Moab and remained there. What does that tell you? Now we get into the drama part of the story. They were living in Bethlehem. His name means my God is king. And they want to get away from the famine. I understand that. But where do they go? They entered the land of, it's right here, verse 2. They entered the land of Moab. And what do we know about Moab? You said it earlier, I think, Chris. What do we know about Moab? Sodom and Gomorrah. They did they murdered infants, lots of sexual depravity, lots of idol worship, human sacrifice, erotic imagery, lewd conduct, everything the Israelites shunned. They hated the Jews and the Jews hated the Moabites. What an unusual place to go for your weekend vacation. Then it gets worse. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. So they leave Bethlehem, they leave Judah, they leave the promised land to escape the famine, and they go to Moab, where there's a different kind of famine. There is no God in Moab. There's no one true God. They have lots of lowercase g gods, but no uppercase g gods. Her husband died and she was left with her 2 sons. Verse 4, and they took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The one was named Orpah, the other is named Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. What a sojourn that was. They went for a weekend and they stayed for 10 years. Now, what does that tell you about them? What would have happened to them over the course of 10 years?
They're fully immersed.
They're fully immersed.
In their customs, I would think.
They would have forgotten everything. And marrying outside of the Jewish faith was absolutely outlawed. It was outlawed. It was banned. It was in Deuteronomy 23. Mixed marriages were not expressly forbidden, but restrictions were placed on their offspring. God had no interest in infiltrating the Jewish people with idol worshipers, with others. Why? Because over time, both the religion would just be diluted. You would have the whatever beliefs the one partner, the spouse had with and the other, and if it wasn't the same, one's going to rule out. They're not going to be wholly devoted to the Lord. And one thing we know about our God is he wants our whole devotion. He doesn't want us to have a foot in 2 different boats. So this tells us that things are not going to go well for Naomi. She lived there about 10 years. Her daughter, she now has 2 daughters-in-law. And then verse 5, then both Malon and Kilion died. And the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. All she's left with is 2 Moabite daughters-in-law in a city that is not familiar to her, in a city where her God is not present and is absolutely abhorred. But she's been there long enough that she's kind of part of it. Got the picture? She's left the house of bread for this den of iniquity. Have we done that? Have we done that in our lives, where we made some bad choices and what seemingly didn't seem like a bad choice, we ended up there, and how life changed when God wasn't the God we knew when we were believers? Then she arose, verse 6, she, Naomi, arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab. For she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. She's in Moab. All she's got are her 2 daughters-in-law. Remember, in those days, women didn't have a job. They didn't work. They were totally dependent on men. Her husband's gone. Her sons are gone. She doesn't have a brother there. So they have no way of providing for themselves, and they have no way to protect themselves. So she hears there's food in the land of Moab. They left because of a famine. Now she hears there's food. She heard in the land of Moab that there's food in Bethlehem. The Lord had visited his people. His people are in Bethlehem. They're in Judah. She's not going back to reestablish her relationship with the Lord God. She's not, doesn't say anything about she wants to get back to her people. She wants to get back to the traditions and the customs of the Jewish people. She's going back to get some food. So even her motivations at this point in time aren't really quite right. Verse 7, so she departed from the place where she was, Moab, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on their way to return to the land of Judah. Good step. First step, good direction. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go, return each of you to your mother's house. Why would she say that? She's going, take care of them. She's going back to the Jewish people. The Jewish people wouldn't really been very interested in having these Moabite women come into their community, come into their fellowship. Naomi goes on to say, may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. So this tells us something about the 2 daughters-in-law. There was a fond relationship between Naomi and the 2 daughters-in-law. They must have cared for each other. They had been kind to her probably in her sorrow, her grief. She loses her husband, she loses her son. They were there for her. They might have ministered to her. We don't know what all they did, but there's a wonderful relationship that has been established between this Jewish woman and these 2 Moabite women. You know, the Lord can work with anyone. The Lord can work with anyone. Verse 9, may the Lord, this is Naomi speaking, may the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. She knew that they needed husbands to survive. She could not provide for them long term. It was essential that they have a husband. Then she kissed them and they lifted up their voices and wept. So there was sorrow at the departure, at the thought of being separated from Naomi as she was going back to Judah. Verse 10, and they said to her, no, we want to remain with you and your people. We want to go with you. We want to be part of that life. Probably out of love for her more than wanting to go back to be part of the Jewish people. Verse 11, second time, Naomi says, return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they should be your husbands? In other words, I don't have any other sons for you to marry. I'm too old to have sons. And if I did have sons, by the time they were old enough, you'd be past childbearing age. This is not an option. Return, my daughters, third mention. Go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should ever have a husband tonight and also bear sons. We're starting to see a glimpse of the new Naomi. Her name, when we first met her, was pleasant and lovely. Now we're starting to see a little bit of a personality change. Verse 13, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Of course not. Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. Who's she blaming? The Lord. Who's to blame? She and Elimelech. They made that choice. Now they're living with it. Verse 14, and they lifted up their voices and they wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. This word clung is cleaving, just like inseparable. Ruth wasn't going anywhere. Remember, Naomi was happy, in fact, encouraged the 2 women to go back to Moab, be with their families. You know, their mothers would help them find a suitable husband. That was the better plan, Naomi thought. But Ruth would have no part of it. Verse 15, Naomi to Ruth, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Lower G, multiple gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. Not famous, very, very well-known verse. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Here's the big thing. Your people shall be my people and your God, my God. Right then and there, she was making a profession of faith. She wanted to be affiliated, associated, assimilated into the Jewish people and to accept the God, Yahweh, the Lord God Almighty, as her God. What a brave woman. She left everything behind. She had her own sorrow too. She was now a widow, and that did not bode well. She was giving up her entire history, her people, her land, even her gods. But she had courage to face the unknown, especially being a Moabite woman in Judah. Even though she was at this point beginning to be on the journey of acceptance of the Lord, she wasn't there yet. And we will see in the subsequent chapters, she is constantly referred to as a Moabite or a Moabitess. Nobody has given her grace that maybe she wants to be one of them. But she's become a worshiper of Naomi's God. We don't know how that happened. We don't know if maybe the Lord God was spoken of in the home. We don't know that. But somehow, and maybe it was God had already indwelled her and called her to him. Maybe that was our first instance of divine intervention in this story. There are many of them. It means final separation from everything she knew to this strange and foreign place. But it was exactly where the Lord wanted her to go. Verse 17, Ruth continues with Naomi, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. She was making a commitment till death do us part. I will not leave you, Naomi, no matter what. No matter how much I'm hated in Judah, no matter if I'm single the rest of my life because no Jewish man will have me, no matter if you get sick, no matter what, I will be with you to the death. I will live where you live. I will take on your God. And where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. She is making a permanent commitment to Naomi and Naomi's soon-to-be lifestyle. Verse 18, when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she finally said no more. Sometimes silence is the best thing we can do. Naomi 3 times had said, go back, go back, go back. And finally, she was silent. Verse 18, so they both went until they came to Bethlehem. This would have been 6 or 7 days journey. It's amazing to me because it would have been unsafe. Remember, it was an unsafe place to be. Judah was crazy. All this sin and all this chaos and all this depravity. But they made their journey, and it came about when they had come to Bethlehem that all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? She'd been gone for 10 years. I imagine she looked different. She probably had no communication. That would have been it doesn't sound like a long distance, but in those days, it was a hugely long distance. They didn't have any of the modern conveniences we have in forms of communication. They probably would have heard nothing. They probably would have known that Elimelech and Naomi and their sons went to Moab, and they probably would have feared for the worst. Is this Naomi? And she said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. The word Mara means bitter. She's become a bitter woman. She's angry about her circumstances. She's angry about what's happened to her. She's blaming the Lord for it. She does not see any part of her own in it. She says, verse 21, I went out full. She forgot that there was a famine. But anyway, she went out full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Well, she was full of the Lord when she left, but that didn't seem as important to her. But the Lord has brought me back empty. Sometimes when the Lord deals with us, he makes sure we're empty so that we know he's the one filling us, that's pulling us out of the pit, the situation we're in. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and with her Ruth, the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, who returned from the land of Moab. You're going to see the mention of Moab and Moabitess. I didn't count the times. It's in the dozens in these 4 chapters. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. This is divine intervention number 2. Chapter 2, verse 1. Now this verse is a little aside. Just pretend that the writer is pulling you off to the side and he's giving you some insight. He's saying, now, Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. The author just wants you to know that, but put it aside because it's not going to become relevant for several more verses. Verse 2, and Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go into the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I may find favor. Ruth knew that they could not survive. There was no man to provide. There were no brothers or sons. So Ruth, being young, being vigorous, I'm imagining, knowing that she's got to do something to take care of her mother-in-law. She's now the provider and protector. She says, can I go glean among the ears of grain? Gleaning was, in those days, it was custom, if not law, that you didn't get every single morsel of grain. You left some in the rows. You definitely left some on the perimeter of the field. And that was a way of allowing the poor people to come in and gather grain for themselves. Was it the best of the best? No, it was not. But it was enough that they could make bread or they could make other food items. So she's just suggesting that she go glean in one of these fields, a field where someone may find favor. And she said to her, Naomi said to her, go, my daughter. So Ruth departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. She happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was the family of Elimelech. Remember, we just read that in verse 1. Now we're seeing how, again, divine intervention, the Lord drew her to that field. There was no sign saying, this is Boaz's field. I'm the kinsman of Elimelech. The Lord led her there. Verse 4, now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, may the Lord be with you. And they said to him, may the Lord bless you. Here we see a glimpse of the relationship that Boaz has with his workers, his servants, his maids. He was blessing them, they were blessing him. I can imagine that he was a good employer. He was a good man. He took care of his people. Verse 5, then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? He noticed Ruth, and he says, whose young woman is this? Who owns her? Well, women didn't have any rights. She would have been somebody's wife, sister, mother. Whose young woman is this? And the servant in charge of the reapers answered and said, she is the young Moabite woman who returned from Naomi from the land of Moab. And she said, please let me, this is Ruth, and please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. This is Ruth speaking to the foreman of the area. Please let me glean and gather after the reapers. She wasn't looking for the best. She was just looking for some grain to take back to her mother-in-law. Thus she came, and she's remained from this morning until now. She's been sitting in the house for a little while. So it's about noontime. She came early. She's worked all morning. She's been a good worker, and she's taking a little break. Verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, this is unusual that the owner of all of this land would go directly to this woman. Did he recognize that she, well, his servant in charge said she's a Moabite. So it might have been unusual for her to approach her at all, but he did. Listen carefully, my daughter. What an interesting term for a woman who was a Moabite, not kin, an interloper, a stranger in his land, on his fields. Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my maids. He was already beginning to protect her. He knew that he was family with Elimelech, and he knew that Ruth came with Naomi, Elimelech's wife. So he was already beginning this kinsman redeemer role, this role of being the provider in the absence of the normal provider. He said to her, let your eyes be on the field which they reap and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. That's big. You know, they might have had some discriminatory feelings, some preference about her being with her and working with her, but he commanded. When you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw. I want to treat you just like the other servants. You are my daughter. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? She's humbled. She realized she's been given greater privilege than she ever deserved. And Boaz answered and said to her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law has, after the death of her husband, has been fully reported to me. Word gets around. Your reputation is known, be it good, be it bad. Boaz goes on, and how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. Not only that, a people that hate your people. Verse 12, he says, may the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. Boaz saw a bigger story with Ruth than what first appeared. He knew that the Lord had brought her there. He knew that she was there to seek refuge. He knew what a good and godly woman she was, although she did not yet accept the Lord, the God of the Jewish people. Then she said in response, I have found favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and indeed have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants. She didn't take it for granted that she was their equal. She didn't feel entitled to have the same rights and privilege. She was crystal clear that this was his grace, his mercy that gave her these privileges. Do you see how God is revealing himself in this story and in these verses? His goodness, not deserving, but he loves us and he accepts us as his children. Verse 14, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here, that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. So she sat beside the reapers, and he served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied, and she even had some left. When the Lord provides, he provides more than we could ever imagine. When she rose to glean, Boaz commanded his servants. Second mention, he commanded his servants, let her glean even among the sheaves and do not insult her. Let her go where the good stuff is. Let her follow you. Let her be in the same paths that you are. And do not insult her. Do not remind her where she's from. Do not remind her that her people are hated. Treat her with love and respect as you would any other maidservant on my property. And you shall purposely pull out for her some grain from the bundles and leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. Again, make it easy for her to take home a lot of grain. Be kind to her. Be generous to her. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening, and then she beat out what she gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. That is the equivalent of a half a bushel full or 5 days worth of grain. So she came home after 1 day of gleaning in the field with far more grain than she ever could have imagined. Verse 18, and she took it up and she went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she gleaned. She also took it out and gave Naomi, which she felt after she was satisfied. And her mother-in-law said, where did you glean today? Where did you work? May he who took notice of you be blessed. She doesn't know. She truly doesn't know. She was hoping, but she doesn't know. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter, may he be blessed of the Lord, who has not withdrawn his kindness to the living and the dead. The living refers to Ruth. The dead refers to Naomi. Remember, Naomi's hopeless. God doesn't like me. He hates me. He's not taking care of me. So she describes herself as being dead. Again, Naomi said to her, the man is our relative. In fact, he is one of our closest relatives. Then Ruth the Moabitess said, furthermore, he said to me, you should stay close to my servants until they have all finished my harvest. Here, Ruth is telling Naomi, not only did Boaz provide He is now the protector. Stay close. Verse 22 of chapter 2, and Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter-in-law, that you go out with his maids, lest others fall upon you in the field. Just validating the importance of her staying in a place where she would be protected. So Ruth stayed close by the maids of Boaz in order to glean until the end of the barley season and the wheat harvest. She was just going for a first day. And now we come to find out that she's been there through the duration of the barley seed harvest and the wheat harvest, a period of some months. They were not overlapping seasons. So there was one season, a bit of a break, and there was another season. And she lived with her mother-in-law. Okay, here we go. Now Naomi starts to take a little bit of extra interest. Naomi, her mother-in-law of chapter 3 said, my daughter, shall I not seek security for you that it may be well with you? Shall I not seek a husband for you that it may be well with you? And now is not Boaz our kinsman with whose maids you were? Behold, he winnows barley in the threshing floor tonight. The night that they would winnow the barley was a night of celebration. It was indicative of a big harvest. There was lots of grain to celebrate, to sell, to give to the people. And so this would have been quite an occasion with a feast and probably with dancing and all sorts of things. So Naomi is making Ruth aware of that. She goes on to say, basically, get ready for a date. You've got a date tonight. Wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself and put on your best dress. And go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Just go there, be part of the celebration, be your lovely self, but just be there. Verse 4, and it shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will tell you what you should do. And she said to her, all that you say, I will do. Yes, Naomi, I will be obedient to what you are telling me. Might it sound peculiar? Might it sound forward? Meg.
The process of uncovering the feet was something that they did when they were proclaiming affection, or that they were choosing that partner.
Exactly. That's exactly right. It wasn't forward. In those times, it was literally part of the process of finding a spouse. Verse 6, and so she went down to the threshing floor, and she did exactly what her mother-in-law had commanded. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, so he had a good time. He was pretty happy. It must have been an amazing harvest. He went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came secretly, just as she had been told, and she uncovered his feet and lay down. And it happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled. Maybe his feet got cold. And bent forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. Now, Boaz was an older man. Some of the historians say probably in his 50s. Some say he wasn't particularly attractive. He had never married. We don't know why he never married. But he'd never had a proposal from a woman before, particularly a young, beautiful woman. And he said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative. This was she asking him to respond to the very thing she had just done. Verse 10, then he said, may you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown your last kindness to be better than the first. You didn't go after the young men, whether rich or poor. You came to me. So he was honored. Yet he was wealthy. He was well-known, he was loved, and he was honored by her. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask, for all my people in the city know you are a woman of excellence. She'd only been there probably around 6 months, and yet her reputation had gotten out. People might have still called her the Moabitess, but my guess is they started to see a different profile of who she was. And now it is true, I am a close relative, said Boaz. However, there's someone even closer than I. And in those days, the closest relative had the right of first refusal to property and to the marriage of a woman who was widowed. Rather, remain this night, so stay here. When morning comes, If he will redeem you, if this other relative, the closer relative, will redeem you, let him do so. But if he does not wish to do so, then I will redeem you. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning. So he's making her a more formal commitment that he fully intends to marry her. But first, he wants to make sure he's not violating somebody else's right. So she lay at his feet, verse 14, until morning, rose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. It was all done in private. It was all done in secrecy. Nothing happened that night. They did not consummate their relationship. It'd be quick for us to jump to that conclusion because of the world we live in today. But this was simply making each other aware of their interest. Verse 15, and again he said, give me the cloak that is on you and hold it. So she held it, and he measured 6 measures of barley, even more barley than he gave her before. And he laid it on her, and she went into the city. And she took the barley, the cloak, to her mother-in-law. And her mother-in-law goes, how did it go, daughter? Don't you know she was sleepless that night? Wondering if it had been successful, wondering if Ruth had been obedient. And she told her all the man had done for her. And she said, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me. This was almost like a gift, a goodwill gift to Naomi, almost like a promise. Do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Here's Boaz caring for Naomi as well as Ruth. Then she said, wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest until he has settled it today. Don't you know that's the truth? He's got this young, gorgeous woman that wants to be his wife. Chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz did as he said he was going to. He went up to the city gate and he sat down there, and behold, the Lord just happened to bring this close relative right by. And Boaz said to the man, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And he also gathered 10 other men, 10 other elders of the city, and said, sit down here. And they did. Then he said to the closest relative, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to her brother Elimelech. So the closest relative had the right of first refusal to the land as well. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here. Buy it before anyone else does, and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me, so that I can do so that there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. So you're the closest, I'm the next closest. If you don't want it, I'll take it. Right now he's just talking about the land. Verse 5, this is where he gets quite clever. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the field from the land of Naomi, oh, by the way, you must also acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased in his inheritance. So if he married Ruth, the inheritance line still would remain Elimelech's line. It's just the family member was stepping in to provide that role in order that children would be born. Family line was everything. That's why they wanted to have so many children, some cases multiple wives, because having children to continue the family line was essential. But the closest relative, he hears that piece of news, and he says, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself. You may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it. What great news for Boaz. What great news for Naomi and Ruth. Verse 7, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the redemption and the exchange of land. A man removed his sandal and he gave it to the other. And this was the manner of attestation. In other words, this was like the signing of a document, the signing of a covenant, the signing of an agreement that says we both agree to this arrangement. So the closest relative said, buy it for yourself, and he removed his sandals. That's the transaction. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses today. If you wondered why he gathered those 10 people in verse 2, this is why. He didn't want there to be any question about the legality of this transaction. You are witnesses today that I have bought the land from the hand of Naomi and all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. The wives were part of property. Moreover, verse 10, I have acquired, this is Boaz now, I think he loved her, but he says, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to raise up the name of the deceased in his inheritance. In other words, he's still saying, I'm going to marry her because I know we need to continue that line. So that the name of the deceased may not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today. This is all a very formal and regular process in those times. And all the people who were in the court and all the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming to your home like Rachel and Leah, both of them who built the house of Israel. They were women that they had children which helped to build the population of the Jewish people, of God's chosen people, both of whom built the house of Israel. May you achieve wealth in Ephrath and become famous in Bethlehem. May you become famous, successful, wealthy, many, many children. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah through the offspring which the Lord shall give you by this woman. That is Boaz's line. We'll see that in a minute. So the deal has been struck legally. Everybody knows it. And now Ruth and Naomi's destiny is certain. So verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife and he went into her. And the Lord enabled her to conceive. And she gave birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today. And may his name become famous in Israel. She had no heirs, which meant she had nothing. But now she has a child coming. She gave a son, it's a son, even better. May he also be to you a restorer of life. You were Mara, you were bitter. You described yourself as dead. You feel that the Lord has abandoned you, but the Lord has restored your life. He sustained you in your old age for your daughter-in-law who loves you. This Moabite woman who came to Judah, became a believer, loves you, and is better to you than 7 sons. She has given birth to him. 7 sons would have been, indicate tremendous blessing from the Lord. She is better than the best blessing. Then Naomi, not Ruth, Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. And the neighboring women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. So they named him Obed, which means servant. And he is the father of Jesse, who is the father of David. And I'm going to jump ahead. It's a little backwards in the genealogy, but remember last week we talked about Rahab and the spies, and one of the spies was named Samuel, and Rahab married him, and they had a son, and the son's name was Boaz. Doesn't that just get you? And to Boaz, Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse, David. And now we can read of the lineage of Jesus Christ. And all of these persons are mentioned.
Repeat that. You're saying about Boaz's.
Boaz is Samuel,
Yeah.
Sam and Samuel,
Yeah.
and Rahab, their son, is Boaz.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that part. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I cried today when I was going through this. I just wept.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it again. How good God is. How he orchestrates everything. If you have any doubt about that, believe. Believe. It's an amazing story, and it's a story of redemption. It's a story of love. It's a story of faithfulness. It's a story of perseverance. It's the story of the Bible. all wrapped up in these 4 chapters. Let's talk a little bit about the characters. We've got about 20 minutes remaining. How does God reveal himself in this book? Certainly by the orchestration of the events, but he reveals himself as the kinsman redeemer. Boaz is a foretaste of Jesus Christ. All the attributes of Boaz, his kindness, his gentleness, his affection, his desire to care for and to love and to provide more than what is expected, is a characteristic of God. Boaz is faithful. He wants only the best for us, as does our kinsman redeemer, Jesus Christ. Naomi, on the other hand, has a bit of good and a bit of not so good. Naomi's pretty human. Naomi gives us a glimpse into ourselves. Like Naomi, we sometimes have trouble recognizing God's goodness and faithfulness at times. When things feel bleak, it is really easy to feel forgotten, invisible, left out, ignored, damaged. But the Lord is still able to deal with us, to mold us, and to shape us, to redeem us, no matter the circumstances. God is faithful to restore an empty life. The famine and hunger in this story were replaced with full harvests and bread gleaned from the fields. Such it is with our lives as well. The anguish of losing her husband and sons is replaced with the loving care and concern of her daughter-in-law, Ruth, who is better to her than 7 sons. Her empty arms are filled with Obed, who she took and laid in her lap and cared for. What a circle for her. Her joy was restored. Ruth, there's so many wonderful characteristics of Ruth. What are some that stand out to you? Sorry? Obedience. Loyal. Faithful. Humble. She was hardworking. She was generous. She was loving. She was strong. She was secure. She was brave. You know, she did some things that were pretty brave. The first day she went into those fields to glean, not knowing a soul, possibly fearing her life at risk, knowing she might be hated and persecuted, going to Boaz's bedside and putting the blanket, uncovering his toes, his feet. Certainly she was sorry to have lost her homeland, her family, her husbands, the prospect of children. She didn't look back. She didn't pull a Lot's wife and look back. She was persistent in moving forward. 4 times Naomi said to her, go back. And 3 times she said, no, I'm going with you. And finally, Naomi realized she wasn't going to influence her anymore. She knew she wanted to go forward, not backward. She knew she wanted to fall into the arms of Jesus, not back to the Moabite people. She was totally obedient in every way, and everything she did was for the love of her mother-in-law and her mother-in-law's God. As a result, she was brought into a position of great favor by being in the lineage of Jesus. She's one of only 2 women mentioned in the Hall of Faith. She found joy in her new homeland. She found joy as a Jewish woman. She found joy among strange people that she eventually made her people. She learned to trust God and his provision for her life. She could discover how generous, loyal, and loving God is. By blessing Naomi, she was blessed. And we talked about Boaz as a type of Christ, as a kinsman redeemer. Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. He gave his life for us. He redeemed us from sin and death. He protects us. He provides for us. We've been brought into a position of great favor. We are his heirs. He's endowed us with riches and privilege. He's exalted us as his bride. He loves him more than we can ever possibly fathom, and he will always love us no matter what we've done. And he will provide for us when we cannot provide for ourselves. So what are the themes we learned today? I've got several. Number one, it is easy to focus on what's wrong. What's wrong with our life? What's wrong with our world? What's wrong with our spouse? What's wrong with our friends? What's wrong with the media? What's wrong with our singleness? What's wrong with our job? That's easy. But it will only make you cynical, crabby, and bitter. Don't be the Mara in your life. If you are a Mara, ask God to forgive you for that and ask him to help you see what's ahead for you. Number two, divine providence. In this story, we see God's making all things come together for good, just as Romans 8:28 tells us. The famine moved the family to Moab, which was a bad thing, but that's where they met Ruth. But then they came back to Bethlehem because there was another famine. The timing of everything, they arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of harvest season. Boaz's field that she just happened to go by, that Boaz just happened to be there that very first day and he saw her. Boaz's sensitivity to her, maybe it was a bit of a physical attraction, but if you recall, the comments were that she was hardworking. He noticed that about her. The faithfulness of God, everybody wins in this situation. Everybody wins. Naomi has a grandchild and therefore an heir. Boaz has a wife and heirs. Remember, he was not married, he was childless as well. Ruth has a husband and heirs. And we have this magnificent story. It's a story of salvation because Ruth, an outsider, became a member of God's chosen people and the family of Jesus Christ. Love for the Lord can grow from a mustard seed. Remember, Ruth started with none. And yet over time, that faith grew to the point that she was able to be eager to go to that land of Naomi's God.
We have a whole Bible full of stories and histories, but don't miss the promises of God. They are there for you to claim and be strengthened by. Here are a couple that surfaced today. God is at work in your life right now. He's not offering you leftovers and scraps. He's working on a harvest in your life. He knows what you need, and he is working on it right now to bring about his divine purposes. In the meantime, he wants you to focus on the blessings in your life, in this world, with your spouse, your children, your singleness, your job, your friends. Be the person that others cannot wait to be around. People who get excited at the mere mention of your name. He has you right where he wants you right now. And if you faithfully serve him in joy, you will experience his loving kindness to an extent you could not even imagine. The harvest will be abundant, more than you could ever have possibly thought. God blesses those who trust him, and we know his grace is sufficient for anything we are facing. In summary, there are only 2 books in the 66 books of the Bible named for women. One is Ruth, the other is Esther. And we have so much to learn from these women. Choices matter, big choices and little ones that turn out to be big. We never know which choices are really going to materialize. We cannot control the circumstances of our life, but we can control how we respond to them. If you harbor any bitterness in your life, go to the Lord and seek his forgiveness, and then get on a path of healing from your hurt. Be assured that trials can result and do result in new beginnings. It's never too late. Develop a mindset of hope, an inner sense of joyful assurance and confidence as we trust God's promises and face the future with his help. Look for the restorers in your life. What brings you joy? Who brings you joy? What circumstances, what situations just make you elated with the world? Whether it's a sunny day or a good cup of coffee or a hug from your little puppy, it doesn't matter. All of these things can give us a booster shot. For Naomi, it was Ruth, Boaz, and Obed who made all the difference in her outlook on life. In this story, everybody wins. Naomi won, Ruth won, and Boaz won. In your life, God wants you to win by loving him more than ever and putting your trust in him. You are not a victim. You are a conqueror, a mighty, mighty woman of God. And if you stay close to him, you can go through anything. You definitely want some Ruth relationships as you go through life. Praise God for the power to develop deep and lasting friendships like Ruth and Boaz. Ask God to make you a more loving and faithful friend, more sensitive and selfless than you may have historically been, more vulnerable even. It is encouraging to see the changes that took place in Naomi as a result of the way Ruth loved her, the compassion, the generosity that Ruth demonstrated. God used Ruth to turn Naomi's bitterness into gratitude, her unbelief into faith, and her despair into hope. And remember, waiting is part of the walk. Be still and know that I am God, Psalm 46:10 tells us. Just take your hands off the steering wheel. He is working in the background. He knows exactly what you need, and he is tending to it right now. At the beginning of the lesson, I told you that these verses from Ruth had particular meaning for me. Years ago, Milton and I are in second marriages, and I made a mess of my first marriage. I only have myself to blame for its failure. So when I married, I was single for 16 years, long time. And so when I did remarry again, I was totally convicted about that marriage. And I wanted to make sure I gave it my all. I gave every ounce of my energy to it, my heart, my soul, my mind. There was nothing going to be more important to me than keeping that marriage sacred and honoring God in the process. So God was first, but my marriage was second. So when Milton and I married in 1997, when it was time to decide what to inscribe in our wedding bands, I put these verses from Ruth in his wedding band. Now, not the whole thing. It never would have fit, but I put in the verse from chapter 1, where Ruth said, "For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me." So I put those verses in his wedding band as a commitment far beyond just the normal vows. To me, it was a commitment between me and the Lord, but I was also making it with Milton. That was all well and good until 5 years later, when our marriage literally hit rock bottom and we were actually filed for divorce. Things had gone in a way I never could have imagined. More awful, more terrible, more destructive than I had ever experienced. And when I came to a place of wanting to be bitter and revengeful and angry, I reminded myself of the verses that I had promised to Milton and to the Lord. And in that moment, I made a decision that no matter what happened, good or bad, I was going to demonstrate my love for the Lord. Whatever I did, I wanted to be glorifying to him. I didn't know what the outcome would be. I couldn't even imagine a positive outcome from the mess that had been created. But nevertheless, that was my prayer every day. Lord, this day, just this day, let all that I do, all that I say, all that I think, all that I feel be glorifying to you. Whatever happens between Milton and I, whether we get back together or not, that is entirely in your will. I can't imagine that happening. But I am just going to live for you in devotion to you. Well, the Lord worked a mighty miracle. in both of our hearts. And as a result, some 2 months later, we were able to reconcile our marriage and turn it into something pretty magnificent. For both of us, it then became a ministry to help other couples whose marriages were irretrievably broken, people that had no hope, people that thought, I can't go on. This has happened to me. There's no way out. So I'm here to tell you there is a way out. The Lord has it all in his hands. We saw how he didn't negotiate. He was divinely providential throughout the story of Ruth. All the various times that he arranged things, he orchestrated things for this amazing outcome. So I want you to believe that for yourself, that the Lord has something good for you. And even if it doesn't seem like it, he is faithful. He is faithful to you. He is faithful to deliver, if only we are faithful to him. May the story of Ruth be a blessing to you. It's the story of all of us. It's got everything in it. And there's got to be something in there you can say, yes, that's my story. And read it again over and over and over. And every time you read it, you will find yourself anew in these pages of the Bible. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of this book of the Bible, which you chose to include for us because it is so instructive. It is so full of you, so full of your redeeming love, so full of examples of how you intervene amongst your people to orchestrate great things for your kingdom. And for that, we are utterly grateful. And we are grateful for the obedience of Ruth and of Boaz and the change of heart for Naomi. There's so much to learn. Thank you for this time together, Lord. I pray you bless all who hear these words and be blessed by them. Amen.